Hi, I'm Pranamya and you're watching Pages of the Globe. So the story I'll be reading today is called Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. This is a very sharp short story that blends dark humor, character study, and a sudden moment of emotional depth. It is set mostly in a bank, and the story focuses on a man who is witnessing a very tense situation, and then what follows is a very surprising explanation or exploration of his memory, of his life, of his identity, of what's lingering in his mind. The piece is very brief, but it's very powerful, and the tone shifts very dramatically in the middle of the story, I would say, and it's very interesting. So I don't want to give away too much just because most of it is actually very much just thinking about his thoughts, his memories. So the big setup to it and everything, if I explain it to you now, it would give away most of the story. So I'll just go ahead and tell you a little bit about the author, Tobias Wolff. However, if you do not want to listen to this, just go ahead and keep pressing the skip button until you see a picture up on the screen that looks like the thumbnail. So Tobias Wolff was born in June 19th, 1945 in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was raised primarily in the Pacific Northwest. His childhood was shaped mostly by instability. He moved often with his mother after his parents' divorce, and these experiences would later influence much of his writing, especially his memoirs. So he is widely celebrated for his short stories and memoirs. His 1989 memoir, The Boy's Life, became a critical and commercial success, and it was later actually adapted into a film starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. In another memoir, In the Pharaoh's Army, it chronicles his time in the Vietnam War. In fiction, Wolff was known for his precise prose, moral clarity, and sharp observations of human nature. His acclaimed short story collections include In the Garden of North American Martyrs, Back in the World, The Night in Question, and that was published in 1996, which actually includes Bullet in the Brain. So as for his accomplishments, he was awarded a National Medal of Arts in 2015. He is also a recipient of the Penn/Faulkner Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and the Guggenheim Fellowship. He is widely regarded as one of America's greatest short story writers, and he is an influential teacher at Stanford University, and he mentors many notable writers. So his legacy rests in his mastery of subtle storytelling, capturing ordinary lives with precision, emotional honesty, and sometimes dark irony. Bullet in the Brain is one of his most famous and widely anthologized works, and it is published in the New York Times as well as many other sites you could probably find it on. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. The line was endless. Anders couldn't get to the bank until just before it was closed, and now he was stuck behind two women whose loud, stupid conversation put him in murderous temper. He was never in the best of tempers anyway, Anders, a book critic known for the wary, elegant savagery with which he dispatched almost everything he reviewed. With the line still doubled around the rope, one of the tellers stuck a position closed sign in her window and walked to the back of the bank, where she leaned against the desk and began to pass the time with a man shuffling papers. The woman in front of Anders broke off their conversation and watched the teller with hatred. "Oh, that's nice," one of them said. She turned to Anders and added, confident of his accord, "One of those little human touches that keep us coming back." Anders had conceived his own towering hatred of the teller, but immediately turned it on the presumptuous crybaby in front of him. "Damned unfair," he said. "Tragic, really. If they're not chopping off the wrong leg or bombing your ancestral village, they're closing their positions." She stood her ground. "I didn't say it was tragic," he said. "I just think it's a pretty lousy way to treat your customers." "Unforgivable," Anders said. "Heaven will take note." She sucked in her cheeks, but stared past him and said nothing. Anders saw that the other woman, her friend, was looking in the same direction, and that the tellers stopped what they were doing and the customers slowly turned and silence came over the bank. Two men wearing black ski masks and blue business suits were standing to the side of the door. One of them had a pistol pressed against the guard's neck. The other guard's eyes were shut and his lips were moving. The other man with a sawed-off shotgun said, "Keep your big mouth shut," though no one had spoken a word. "One of you tellers hits the alarm, you're all dead meat. Got it?" The tellers nodded. "Oh, bravo," Anders said. "Dead meat." He turned to the woman in front of him. "Great script, huh? The stern, brass-knuckled poetry of the dangerous classes." She looked at him with drowning eyes. The man with the shotgun pushed the guard to his knees. He handed the shotgun to his partner and yanked the guard's wrists up behind his back and locked them together with a pair of handcuffs. He then toppled him onto the floor with a kick between the shoulder blades. He took his shotgun back and went over the security gate at the end of the counter. He was short and heavy and moved with peculiar slowness, even torpor. "Buzz him in," his partner said. The man with the shotgun sauntered along the line of the tellers, handing each of them a hefty bag. When he came into the empty position, he looked over at the man with the pistol. "Whose slot was that?" Anders watched the teller. She put her hand to her throat and turned to the man she was talking to. He nodded. "Mine," she said. "Then get your ugly butt in gear and fill that bag." "There you go," Anders said to the woman in front of him. "Justice is done." "Hey, bright boy, did I tell you to talk?" "No," Anders said. "Then shut your trap." "Did you hear that?" Anders said. "Bright boy, right out of the killers." "Please be quiet," the woman said. "Hey, are you deaf or what?" The man with the pistol walked over to Anders. He poked the weapon into Anders' gut. "You think I'm playing some games?" "No," Anders said, but the barrel tickled like a stiff finger, and he had to fight back the titters. He did this by making himself stare into the man's eyes, which were clearly visible behind the holes in the mask, pale blue and rawly red-rimmed. The man's left eye kept twitching, and he breathed out an ammoniac smell that shocked Anders more than anything else that had happened, and he was beginning to develop a sense of unease when the man prodded him again with the pistol. "You like me, bright boy?" he said. "No," Anders said. "Then stop looking at me." Anders fixed his gaze on the man's shiny wingtip shoes. "Not down there, up there." He stuck the pistol under Anders' chin and pushed it upward until Anders was looking at the ceiling. Anders never had paid much attention to that of the bank, a pompous old building with marble floors and counters and pillars and gilt scrollwork over the tellers' cages. The domed ceiling had been decorated with mythological figures whose fleshy toga-draped ugliness Anders had taken in at a glance many years earlier and afterward declined to notice. Now he had no choice but to scrutinize the painter's work. It was worse than he had remembered, and all of it seemed executed with the utmost gravity. The artist had a few tricks up his sleeve and used them again and again. A certain rosy blush on the underside of clouds, a coy backward glance on the faces of the cupids and fawns. The ceiling was crowded with various dramas, but the one that caught Anders' eye was Zeus and Europa, portrayed in this rendition as a bull ogling a cow from behind a haystack. To make the cow sexy, the painter had canted her hips suggestively and given her long, droopy eyelashes, with which she gazed back at the bull with sultry welcome. The bull wore a smoke, and his eyebrows were arched. If there had been a bubble coming out of his mouth, it would have said, "Hubba, hubba." "What's so funny, bright boy?" "Nothing." "You think I'm comical? You think I'm some clown?" "No." "If you mess with me again, your history, capiche?" Anders burst out laughing. He covered his mouth with both hands and said, I'm sorry, then snorted helplessly through his fingers and said, "Capiche? Oh God, capiche?" And at the man with the pistol raised the pistol and shot Anders right in the head. The bullet smashed Anders' skull and plowed through his brain and exited behind his right ear, scattering shards of bone into the cerebral cortex, the corpus callosum, back towards the basal ganglia, and down into the thalamus. Before all this occurred, the first appearance of the bullet in the cerebrum set off a crackling chain of ion transports and neurotransmissions. Because of their peculiar origin, these trace a peculiar pattern, fleshically calling to life a summer afternoon some 40 years past, and long since lost to memory. After striking the cranium, the bullet was moving at 900 feet per second, a pathetically sluggish glacial pace compared with the synaptic lightning that flashed around it. Once in the brain, that is, the bullet came under the mediation of the brain time, which gave Anders plenty of leisure to contemplate the scene that, in a phrase he would have abhorred, passed before his eyes. It is worth noting that what Anders did not remember, given what he did remember. He did not remember his first lover, Sherry, or what he had most madly loved about her before it came to irritate him. He did not remember his past wife, whom he had also loved, before she exhausted him with his predictability, or his daughter, now a sullen professor of economics at Dartmouth. He did not remember just standing outside of his daughter's door as she lectured her bear about his naughtiness and described the truly appalling punishments Paws would receive unless he changed his ways. He did not remember a single line of the hundreds of poems he had committed to memory in his youth, so that he could give himself the shivers at will. Not Silent upon a peak in Darien, or My God, I hear this day, or All my pretty ones. Did you say all? Oh, hell kite, all? None of them did he remember, not one. Anders did not remember his dying mother saying of his father, I should have stabbed him in his sleep. He did not remember Professor Josephs telling his class how the Spartans had released Athenian prisoners from their mines if they could recite Aeschylus, and then reciting Aeschylus himself right there in the Greek. Anders did not remember how his eyes had burned at those sounds. He did not remember the surprise of seeing a college classmate's name on the jacket of a novel not long after they had graduated, or the respect he had felt after reading the book. He did not remember the pleasure of giving respect. Nor did Anders remember seeing a woman leap to her death from the building just opposite of his own just days after his daughter was born. He did not remember shouting, Lord have mercy. He did not remember deliberately crashing his father's car into a tree, or having his ribs kicked in by 3 policemen and an anti-war rally, or waking himself up with laughter. He did not remember when he began to regard the heaps of books on his desk with boredom and dread, or when he grew angry at writers frightening him. He did not remember when everything began to remind him of something else. This was what he remembered. Heat. A baseball field. Yellow grass. The whir of insects. Himself leaning against a tree as the boys of the neighborhood gather for a pickup game. The captains, precociously large boys named Burns and Darsh, argue the relative genius of Mantle and Mays. They have been worrying the subject all summer, and it has become tedious to Anders, an oppression like the heat. Then the last 2 boys arrive, Coyle and a cousin of his from Mississippi. Anders has never met Coyle's cousin before, and will never see him again. He says hi with the rest, but takes no further notice of him until they've chosen sides, and Darsh asks the cousin which position he wants to play. Shortstop, the boy says. Short's the best position there is. Anders turns and looks to him. He wants to hear Coyle's cousin repeat what he's just said, but he knows better than to ask. The others will think he's a jerk, ragging the kid for his grammar. But that isn't it, not at all. It's that Anders is strangely roused, elated, by those final 2 words, their pure unexpectedness and music. He takes the field in a trance, repeating them to himself. The bullet is already in the brain, and it won't be outrun forever, or charmed to a halt. In the end, it will do its work and leave the troubled soul behind, dragging its comet tail of memory and hope and talent and love into the marble hall of commerce. That can't be helped. But for now, Anders can still make time for the shadows to lengthen on the grass, time for the tethered dog to bark at the flying ball, time for the boy in right field to smack his sweat-blackened mitt and softly chant, They is, they is, they is.
The end.
So that was Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. Now I'm just going to give you a in-depth analysis of it and essentially what happens in the story and what it all means. Before I begin, I do want to apologize. I will be looking down a lot in this video because normally I don't actually film my analysis, I record it. However, because I decided to do it on video, I cannot memorize everything I'm going to say in like a 10-minute span, so I'm going to have to look down on my notes a lot, so I apologize beforehand. So as a quick overview, Bullet in the Brain, what is it? It delivers a very striking, complex narrative that packs an emotional punch. It centers on Anders, who is this jaded, cynical book critic, and his reaction during a bank robbery. The story pivots very dramatically in its final, third section, I would say, and it turns inwards into his mind at the moment of his death. So let's do a quick character study on Anders. He is introduced as a very sarcastic, bitter man who has become emotionally numb due to years of intellectual elitism. His disdain for mediocrity and cliche has hardened him into someone who reacts to serious situations, like being held up at gunpoint, with irony and scorn. Even at gunpoint, he can't stop mocking what he perceives as bad writing or melodrama. This cynicism is very central to his character. He's laughing during the robbery, he's cracking jokes, he's making snide comments, and it's not out of nerves. It's not like, for me, for example, whenever I'm in a very awkward situation, I will start making jokes, I will start laughing. When I don't know what to do, I always laugh, I always giggle. He's not doing this because of nerves, though. He's literally just doing this out of literary derision. He is very alienated, not only from the people around him, but from authentic emotional experience. He shows that, I would say the author in this case shows that too much irony can become very corrosive. It strips life of its wonder, joy, or empathy. I have to say, as soon as I started reading this, I decided automatically I kind of hate Anders. He gives very much that type of person who is wrapped up in this like superiority complex and thinks that they are better than everyone, which is understandable because obviously he's very intellectual, he's very smart. However, at the same time, it's he comes off as a very big ass, and no one he's automatically, I would say, not very likable. So what is the most important part of the story? It would probably be the last third, the final section that marks this very radical shift from the outer world to his memory, his inner memory. So just as the bullet enters his brain, the narrative zooms into his final moments of consciousness. And he's not flashing back to formative trauma, love, or loss. He's just remembering this very simple childhood moment. A boy's voice in a baseball game saying, "They is, they is, they is." This shift kind of achieves several things. First of all, there's this reconnection with innocence, right? This moment is not significant in a traditional sense, but it reflects a lost purity, a time before his world became very jaded, very cynical. It's free from any irony, any criticism, any ego. It's pure just sensory memory. He's talking about the summer air, the grass, the green grass, the voice, a misused verb. The grammatical error there is something that Anders, a critic, a literary critic, would scorn. However, as he's dying, he's remembering it more of an affection. This contrast kind of reveals how much he has lost in becoming a critic. This also shows that what we remember matters, right? He's questioning, Tobias Wolff is questioning the idea that a life can flash before your eyes. Instead, he's suggesting that our deepest, most defining memories may be very small, visceral moments, not dramatic climaxes. Anders does not recall great literature. He says he's memorized hundreds and hundreds of lines of great pieces of literature, but he doesn't remember any of that. He doesn't remember any of his failed relationships or any career milestones that he probably put hundreds of hours of work into. He's just remembering this moment of childlike awe. This shows a lot of tragic irony. I would say the tragedy lies in not just Anders' death, obviously, but how long he lived without truly living. The story suggests that Cynicism is a kind of death in itself. The bullet is ironically freeing his mind from it. He has spent majority of his life critiquing a lot of things, critiquing the way that people live, critiquing the way that people act, and that is kind of subconsciously, right? His actual job is just critiquing the way people write. However, subconsciously, or maybe consciously, he is critiquing everything that people do. And this type of cynicism is, like I said before, a kind of death on its own. The bullet that enters his brain is freeing him from that. However, almost immediately he dies. So it's freeing him from that and then immediately killing him. What are some themes we see in here? We see cynicism versus wonder. Anders is a very cautionary person. He's lost his ability, he's seemingly lost his ability to marvel or feel joy. And his death reveals that true meaning lies not in this this great intellect that he seems to possess, but experience. We also have memory versus identity. The story asks us what defines us. For Anders, it was not ever his career or his rigid personality, but it was more of this hidden fragment of forgotten joy. We also see morality and final consciousness. Wolff explores the idea of final thoughts and suggests that death strips us of all pretense, all of this flamboyancy. I don't want to call it flamboyancy, but I guess pretense is the best word to say in this case. And it kind of just returns us to the core of who we are, of what we represent, or at least what we used to represent, or who we were. The final theme we see is art and life. As a book critic, Anders has replaced lived experience with analysis. His fate questions the value of artistic judgment when it comes detached from the emotional truths art is meant to express. Quickly, I just want to go over the tone. The tone is very irony. At first, it's ironic, but then it shifts to elegy almost. The first half is laced with satire, dark humor, but the final section is lyrical and tender, and it kind of mirrors his internal transformation from detachment to emotional reawakening, though it comes at the moment of his death. In conclusion, this is a very powerful story about the costs of losing touch with wonder, the tragic limits of intellect, and the surprising power of small forgotten joys. Oftentimes I read stories on this channel about the cost of losing touch with reality and, the many terrible things that happen in society. However, in this case, it is that when you lean too much into that, what are you losing? Through the ironic downfall of a deeply, deeply, deeply flawed man, the author crafts a very moving meditation on memory, morality, and what truly matters at the end. This story was quite short, but it rewards close reading, and the emotional impact that it has on a reader lingers very long after the final sentence. That is it for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next.